Never let me live that down. His mom, by the way, keeps saying, well, you got your degree from that university in Michigan, right? Never likes it. Anyway, I'm from Michigan State University, and we're going to be talking about macroecology for the next little while. And what I tried to do is get a broad spectrum of people who have done work in macroecology as Jim's students. And obviously, there are a lot more people that could have been here. So this is just a sampling. We're going to start out here with Pablo Marquet, who's going to be talking to us about the beginnings of macroecology.
Thank you. So, great pleasure to be here, actually to be back here. I'm amazed with the diversity of people, disciplines, and faces. A lot of them that I didn't know, and I'm so glad I get to know the other member of this distinguished lineage. And as usual, there should be some phylogenetic autocorrelation, so we tend to think alike. And you will see, because some of my presentation will actually touch or deal with issues that others have already brought up. And I couldn't resist to say that, why is this here? I have an hypothesis. Am I right? Good. So, the beginning of macroecology, what I'm going to do today is just to make a couple of statements very quick, and a digression. Probably the digression is the most important part. I have to say that, and I have to say that I came from the negative latitudes, by the way. So, statement number one, beginnings are always difficult to ascertain, mysterious. Be it the origin of life, species of ideas. I mean, there's something about beginnings that are untraceable. There's a mystery always at the beginnings, at least at some beginnings. Endings used to be dramatic, well-announced and everything, but beginnings are difficult. So what I'm going to try to do here is to make a statement that I think that this is statement number two. The beginning of macroecology, it might be actually, started with this paper published in American Zoologist, which is now the Journal of Integrative Biology, I think. And it was back in 1981, and has a title, very appealing one. It's 2 decades of hominage to Santa Rosalia towards a general theory of diversity. It's a topic that Jim has been dealing with, I would say, for a big part of his career. And I should say that it's really interesting that this publication actually was honoring Hutchinson, and it was the whole symposium, by the way. If you read the description of the symposium, you will discover some interesting issues there that to somehow make explicit why macroecology actually arose. And this is an hypothesis, and I will say that macroecology actually arose because it was a natural response, it was a build-up in the scientific community that responded to this essential tension between theory and empiricism, between inductive science and deductive science, between data and predictions. And it was pretty much a way of dealing and trying to understand this complexity of the natural world. And if you go to the original description of the symposium by Malcolm Gordon, it says here, and I just amplify it. I'm going to read it for you. Otherwise, if I don't read it, it's impossible to be here. So it's just many empirical ecologists have strong feelings that ecological theory has a long way to go before it begins coping with the diversity and complexity of the natural world. Whether or not that world is perturbed by human influences, and it says also many theoretical ecologists feel equally strongly that undue emphasis on diversity and complexity has impeded progress toward understanding of underlying fundamental relationships. An important result of these differing approaches and perception has been the development, particularly in recent years, of a wide and deep gap in communication between these two important subgroups of ecologists. And I would say that pretty much the same tension and the same two camps still exist. And there are more bridges to cross, probably, but I would say that the same essential tension still exists in the discipline. So what Jim actually did in that essay was to suggest at least two ways of dealing with this complexity and make advances in a theory to understand species diversity, and that in many ways were anticipatory. They were paved the way to what actually followed in the years to come. And I want to touch on them briefly. What Jim said was, I suggest a future attempt to understand patterns of species diversity might focus on developing two kinds of theoretical constructs, what he called capacity rules, which describe how characteristics of the physical environment determine its capacity to support life, and allocation rules, which describe how limited energetic resources are subdivided among the species. You can recognize that these two fundamental axes pretty much underlie a lot of the work in macroecology and also in metabolic ecology too. So capacity rules, pretty much capacity rules are related to what he called availability of usable energy. That wasn't a new idea by the time, but it was, as Jim recognizes, but there was some important implications. One of the implications is that Hutchinson pretty much have always liked the idea of energy and tried to put energy back in the picture to understand communities. And Jim was trying to do the same thing and show that it has a strong predictive power of diversity patterns. And here is two of the original plots that he reported, probably done by some graduate students at the time, and in a different kind of software. You can tell by the size of the dots there. But pretty much, this relationship have endured the test of time. And also, Jim makes some claim there. I mean, he said that it is not just about energy availability, but it's also about variation in the physical environment in time and space. That we have to take care of that or account of that in order to have a meaningful understanding of how energy and its variability in time and space actually is controlling diversity. This probably has proven to much harder to tackle. And by the way, just recently, and I think it's Walter just made a very interesting take on this, and he actually not only used energy, but also the area where that energy is contained and how much it has changed through time. And he has shown that it provides a very good prediction of species richness observed in different biotic regions across the world and for different kind of taxa. So Jim was right, and time, area, and energy were fundamental kind of drivers. Allocation rules. Allocation rules have been more, I would say, difficult to tackle, but at the same time more fruitful to some extent. And what macroecology have focused a lot, or at least this is my take on it, is on the energetic equivalence. So how much energy different species appropriate within local communities. And the kind of the quintessential relationship to understand that is what I call the Moore-Damouf plot. This is Moore in the 40s published this relationship between size and density. And his point was that we should to account for ecological habitat in order to understand the density of the species, and he put this figure out that later on, back in 1981, John Damouf compiled data for mammalian herbivores and put this sort of relationship together, whose slope, as you might know, implies that the species tend to use the same amount of energy within local communities, or a different scale, whatever the scale you measure it. They have been proven over and over his maximum abundance and his size, going from unicellular organisms to large sequoias. They all seem to follow the same relationship. This relationship has been shown to be invariant in space, and this is a study we published back in the 90s showing that you have different communities under perturbation, you tend to recover the same pattern, even though they look completely different. Different species, different arrangement, but they reassemble and they always kind of comply to the same strong relationship. They have been shown also in some other marine communities that have been perturbed by human action. You always recover the same pattern you see here. Composition, this is a multivariate space of the composition. You see two different communities. But then, if you look them through the eyes of the scaling relationship, it is the same. And the same has been shown by Brian for BCI. This is precisely the same relationship, but done in a slightly different way. Through time, you get the same, pretty much the same scaling, and this is for Guanacaste also. Through time, you get the same scaling relationship. So this relationship is invariant in time, is invariant in space, and across time for a one local community. This is very fantastic because Ethan and Morgan have shown that you have tendencies through time that tend to equalize the amount of energy that species use through in a local community. This is abundance through time, this is medium mass through time. They tend to scale negatively, and the consequence is that the metabolic rate at the level of the community stayed pretty much the same. And this happens even though you have strong turnover in the number of species. New species arise or get to the community, and some species disappear from the local community. So there are some fundamental rules there in terms of the allocation that I will just summarize in this statement here, which is the zero-sum red queen hypothesis. That said basically that there are an equivalence, a fundamental equivalence in the amount of energy captured by species within associations or local communities. And the entailment of this is that whatever one species gets, somewhere else is going to be losing it. And this brings us to a very important issue, which is what is happening with the human population. And this is a plot taken from Tony Barnowski's PNAS paper back in 2008, and he made some back-of-the-envelope calculations on how much biomass is located in these large mammals above 44 degrees, 44 kilos actually. You know, temperature and body size are related. So this is a global warming that induced some extinctions that was recovered pretty soon. But then with the Industrial Revolution, there is a split up here where you have humans have increased their take of biomass. But if you add on top of that the biomass that we put in all the things that we call our pets or pet food or things that are related to human uses, like consumption of meat and other products, you will see that the amount of biomass that we have been putting there for our own use is humongous, and that is having strong consequences. Recently, 2 days ago, there was this paper in Nature where Jim is a co-author, and I happen to be a co-author too, that points to this tipping point in the biosphere, which might be scarily close. So, second part, the digression. This is a very fancy picture I found in the internet. It's published in a book called Le Macroscope. And it's back in 1975. And it says the microscope is to look at the infinitely small. The telescope, the infinitely large. And look at this. the macroscope, the infinitely complex. And what is here? Nature and society. And in fact, probably if you look ahead, what is going to happen in the next 10 years, we will say macroecology is going to deal with human businesses more and more, how we crop, how we actually interact, and so on and so forth. But I think that we should use the macroscope also in a novel way to look at the man itself. So, and here's the part that it's overlapped with Alan's. So I've been looking at some patterns in Jim's interaction network. This is Jim's universe. Here's Jim Brown. See, this is his co-author network. All the 200 and something people that have interacted with him by being co-author in a paper. You can try to see your name there. There you go. Jim Brown, Brian, here you are. Savage, and Ernest, Barry, Mark Taper, etc. So, you guys, everyone is there. And here's the first pattern. And this is for real. This is the co-author's area curve. This is the first time this data is done. This is the geographic distribution of co-author as of this year. And this is the number of co-author, and this is the area. So how many co-authors you get as you start increasing the area center at Albuquerque. Okay? I will not talk about the exponent. I don't have a theory yet, but. And then let me tell you that no man is an island. There's a famous poet, English poet, that said that. But could papers be? What if a paper is an island and populated by different species which are co-authors? So everyone has these papers which are very species rich, you know, but also you have papers with just one other co-author. So let's see if they are nested or not. So suppose that you interact with the generalist, meaning people who is in all the paper tend to also be the ones that are in the less co-author paper or the less rich formats, and they become nested. Actually, this is a highly nested patterns of co-authorships. I don't have time to go in what this means, but there are some holes. So you would predict that, for example, this is a co-author of there. Suppose it's Marquet. You go there, there's a blank. So that's a paper that it should have been, but I wasn't. So with that, we should end and say thank you to Jim and Astrid for these years and for their friendship and mentorship. Thank you.